Welcome to the Social Engineer Podcast Human Element Series. This is episode 274. I'm Chris Hadnagy, CEO and founder of Social Engineer LLC, the Innocent Lives Foundation, and the Institute for Social Engineering. And I've been hosting this podcast since 2009. As always, it is sponsored by our company, Social Engineers. There's a few exciting things coming up as this is September when you're listening to this episode. In just 1 month, we're going to be holding the Human Behavior Conference here in Orlando. So if you want to get a chance to meet and learn from Dr. Abby Morono, Joe Navarro, and myself, come down for one day on October 30th. You can find out more information on humanbehaviorcon.com. And of course, you can get a link on social-engineer.com too. If you're interested in social engineering, any aspect of it, then you should be on our Slack channel. We have, I think, almost 2,000 people in there now every day talking about the psychology of it, how it works. Of course, it's family friendly and legal, as I always say. So if that sounds like you, then join us in there and you'll have a good time. We even have a job board. So if you're looking for work, and sometimes companies come in and say they're looking for new employees, and sometimes people come in and say they're looking for work. I think we've had about 11 people find jobs through that. So join us in there. We'd be happy to have you. If you can't find the link in the show notes, just ping me on LinkedIn or another social and I'll get it to you. I want to invite everyone also to take a moment to go check out InnocentLivesFoundation.org. If you're not familiar with the nonprofit there, it was started about 7 years ago. And actually 7 years ago this month, if you can believe that. And we focus on helping law enforcement geolocate people who traffic children and create child abuse material. I can't be prouder of the people over there. We've done over 525 cases now. It's an amazing work. And we're non-vigilante group. So if you're not familiar with what that means, we don't make believe we're a little kid on the internet and then get these guys and gals to come to McDonald's and film them. That doesn't really work for law enforcement. We actually use our skills in information security to geolocate them, searching the dark web and the open web. And then when we get a case, we hand it off to proper law enforcement agencies so they can be apprehended. And if you want to help us, support us, we are a nonprofit. You can go to InnocentLivesFoundation.org. You can donate yourself, your time, or your money. All of those things are needed. And if you're a parent or a caregiver and you're looking for some information on how to talk to your kids about this, then you can go to the website. We have a lot of stuff there about that. And if you like the music on the podcast, it is none other than Clutch. As everyone knows, Neil Fallon, the lead singer, helped me start the ILF 7 years ago. We're huge fans of them. So go check out clutchmerch.com. And if you like this episode, give us up a thumbs up, not a up thumbs up, a heart, a like, whatever it is. And keep your comments coming. We love when you give us themes, topics you want to hear. Then we go out and look for guests that fit the things you're looking for, which brings me to the topic for today. Our guest, Rachel Kosar, is a leader in the field of nonverbal communication and leadership presence facilitation. As a former nationally ranked athlete and professional ballet dancer, which we're going to talk about that gap right there, Rachel has a knack of translating unique skills into relatable business skills and competencies. Virtual Sapiens comes as an evolution of Rachel's combined work as a founder of Choreography for Business, a nonverbal communication consulting firm, as well as a faculty member with Mobius Executive Leadership and as a leadership presence facilitator with Ariel Group. Rachel has worked with leaders from GE, BCG, Pfizer, Accenture, McKinsey, HBS, and much more. And Rachel, it is wonderful to have you on the show today.
Thanks, Chris, for having me.
So before we get into the company, I'm interested in that. How do you go from being a choreographer, a ballet dancer, and now you're creating software and doing things in nonverbals and leadership?
Yeah, it when you say it like ballet dancer to like AI startup CEO, it does sound totally outlandish, but there's a pretty common thread. And the common thread is the nonverbal aspect of communication, right? As a dancer, for anyone who's seen a Nutcracker or any ballet, you'll know that like we don't use words ever in our performances, right? It's all physical expression. It's all nonverbal communication from an artistic lens. And so that's always been my perspective, my space. Always very much believing in the power that we have as humans to communicate without the use of words. And so when I retired in 2016, I started working at Harvard in their fundraising offices and just noticed that there was this pretty serious lack of awareness from the professionals around me in terms of their body awareness and the way that they were showing up to conversations and communicating with people. And so I thought, there are probably some things that I learned as a dancer that could be applied to these relationship-driven professional, like more traditional professional workplace experiences. And that was when I founded Choreography for Business, which was all about me coaching, facilitating, helping salespeople, leaders just develop a higher sense of body awareness and presence. Mm-hmm. And then when the pandemic happened and video became the way we communicated, I thought that we would have a really hard time. I thought a lot of professionals would have a hard time showing up effectively on video because it's awkward. It feels disconnecting, but it is such a powerful way to connect as humans, right? And so with video being the channel of communication we were using to connect, AI actually became an option because in the world of choreography for business and the work I was doing before that, people just weren't on video. So it was really hard to use technology. So video coming online was a big part of me deciding to found Virtual Sapiens.
Mm-hmm. Did you find during COVID that, because like you said, it was brand new. I mean, we did have video technology before that, but it was really rare to hold a meeting, like a long meeting on that. Did you find that a lot of people just weren't even coming on camera? They would just stay off camera?
Yeah. Like like people would have Skype calls, Skype business calls, or, like Zoom wasn't really a thing before the pandemic. It existed, but it had only just come onto the scene in the years leading up to the pandemic. And it was very common for people to, telecommute, and it would just be audio, right? So you would never have like the video representation of the person, or rarely.
And then people start coming on camera and they have no clue like how to interact with the camera, right? And we're only getting this much of a person. So whereas non-verbally before you had everything. So how does Virtual Sapiens help with that part of the problem? Yeah.
So Virtual Sapiens is, we use AI to help people master their presence and communication skills. And the way it works is whether you're on a video call or you just want to kind of offline practice running through a speech or maybe a conversation role play, we provide professionals with a number of different ways to get coaching and feedback from our AI. The AI is trained to recognize a human, and we have designed our own in-house AI around behaviors, communication behaviors that we want to encourage, and communication behaviors we may want to let people know about so they can rewire certain habits, right? Like different types of face covering or face touching with your hands can send a message of being a little nervous or anxious or not composed and confident. Right? Using hand gestures effectively can be really helpful in building trust in person and on video. So those are some things that we might have the AI reflect back to the user. And then we help the user understand different options they may have to increase things like authority and perceived trustworthiness and things like that.
Fascinating. I bet that was such a useful tool during, I teach at the University of Arizona, and I make a rule that the students have to be on camera, right? Unless there's an emergency, or, I had a couple moms there and they're feeding their babies. So of course, but so you have to be on camera. And the first year I did that, a lot of the students came in and they were like, none of our other professors even come on camera themselves.
Wow. Yep.
And I'm like, what? Like you're sitting there for 3 hours in a lecture and you're learning from a black box. And I'm like, that is it feels inhuman, right?
Yeah,
so when you're combating even that kind of an attitude, like where people just are like, I don't come on camera. How do you even start off? Because I get the value of what you created, but how do you even get the message across that there is so much power in being able to see each other? So you need to be on camera.
Yeah. So it's interesting because initially when we were founded, we were all in on video interactions, and all of our thought leadership was around just that, like making the argument for showing up on video. And I think in that sense, we tried to redirect the conversation towards being more intentional about when you use video. Because I think a part of the issue was during the pandemic, there was such fatigue around always having to show up on video because organizations didn't have enough intentionality around what warranted being a video call versus an email, or actually just a phone call is fine sometimes. And so there was just too much video going on. And if there's too much video going on, it's hard to say like always show up on video, because there are some meetings that are like straight up a waste of people's time.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the conversation we had around video at that time. But now, now we actually have updated the tool to support in-person meetings as well.
Oh.
And so we actually now rely or depend on our partners and customers to tell us what their internal video on, video off policy is. And if a company comes to us and says, we just straight up don't require people to be on video, I'm not going to convince them otherwise, but I will say that that's totally fine. Our platform can still be used to help your professionals show up in person and communicate more effectively as well. So we're not just, relegated to the video realm anymore.
Yeah. I think there was so many stories of people mistakenly taking their laptops into the bathroom or getting changed, and not forgetting that their camera was on. That also brought a lot of fear of, oh my gosh, I can't tell you how many people were buying camera covers for everything. After those things happen, right? So I get that. So tell me more about this, using it in person, because now we have a lot of companies that are hybrid, right? Sometimes you go to the office, sometimes you work at home. So how does it work, with that hybrid environment?
Yeah. So our AI always only analyzes one person at a time, right? So if you're using our platform to practice like an in-person speech or something, or you did a keynote and you wanted to upload that video and it's of you in person on the stage behind a podium or whatever, our AI just looks for different things. So if you're standing, for example, the way we look at eye gaze and eye contact is going to be different than if you're seated and virtual, right? If your audience is virtual, you have one audience perspective and it's that of the lens. If you're standing and in person, you have like a table full of people in front of you or an auditorium full of people. And then you want to be conducting eye gaze panning, right? Equal due to a variety of different audience vantage points. So, we look at hand gestures differently because on video, you typically don't see people's hands unless they make a gesture. But in person, we'll see the hands all the time, unless they're in your pockets, but we'll almost see the hands all the time. So a gesture is actually looks a lot different. So those are some of the things that we do to support in-person communication practice. You don't have to be standing with your full body in the picture. But sometimes we'll let people choose if they're practicing for an in-person or virtual audience. Sometimes we'll just auto detect it. It kind of depends on which feature you're using.
It's nice. So talk to me about the AI and behavior change, because you mentioned that before. Like what are some of the things you're looking for? What are some of the behaviors you're encouraging and some of the ones that you're trying to discourage?
Yeah. So we like to think about our AI as like a mirror, right? We want our AI to provide personalized and nuanced feedback that is reflective of how individuals are showing up. We don't want our AI to start prescribing specific behaviors to our users, because that's where I think you can get into trouble, especially with nonverbals. What I mean by that, so let's take the example of hand gestures. So if this is a virtual environment, we want to encourage people to have their hands be visible to the person on the other end, right? We want to encourage open palm facing forward hand gestures, because that can help with things like trust and, signaling openness and like things like that. What we don't want to do is tell everyone, like, when you see someone, you have to wave at the beginning or, steeple your hands because this is a power posture. We're not going to prescribe specific hand gestures to people, but we will reflect back whether you've used hand gestures, whether you've used too many hand gestures, because on video, it can get really distracting. And then we'll actually point users towards our learning lab where they can see a variety of videos that myself and actually Dr. Morono have put together around like developing a hand gesture vocabulary. Like, what feels right for you. And I think the fascinating thing about one of the fascinating things about our product is that we sit at the intersection between AI and behavior change, right? At the intersection of AI and human behaviors. And it's been fascinating for us to see how people react and then change their behaviors as a result of the information our AI is reflecting back to them.
Oh, that's interesting. Especially with the, I love the section you said, like where you have training videos. I think that's important. Like if somebody says, oh, that's not really the best thing to do, but I don't see the proper thing or a better way to do it, maybe then I'll never be able to learn that. Right. I used to be a very palms down kind of communicator. That was always the way I did it, right? Then I had a friend, Robin Dreek, who, he kind of taught me about the ventral displays, and Joe Navarro was a mentor of mine, still is. And he would tell me, like, this is so commanding and demanding. And if you open it up, it will be better. It took me a couple years to learn how to do that naturally.
Yes.
I mean, not that it took me a couple years to learn it, but to just make it a part of my habit.
Totally.
So,
and like, not to interrupt you, Chris, but
no, please.
I just feel like that's the piece that so many people are missing. We live in this world of like immediacy, right? Mm-hmm. You want to distract yourself. You go into TikTok, social media, whatever, and it's there for you immediately, right? These like dopamine hits.
Yeah.
And, you interact with a tool like ours, and you go through one assessment and you're like, oh, cool, great. I got it.
Yeah.
I got it.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, actually, some of these habits that our AI is reflecting back to you are like so deeply ingrained that in order for you to like actually change them, like you need to be reminded over and over again over a period of time in order for you to like consistently and like make the change sticky.
I love that point, because I'm telling you, I'm a very direct communicator. So it was more like a drill sergeant. When I was teaching classes, I'd be drill sergeanting, and Robin's like, bro, you're going to exhaust yourself and everyone that ever listens to you. Like, you really have to, and voice inflection, smile on your face, a little head tilt, open ventrals. And I'm like, this doesn't sound like, it sounds like I'm going to be faking it the whole time. And it took me, I would say, probably a good 2 solid years before I found myself doing it and not having to remind myself to do it. And I was like, oh, look at that. But you're right. I wanted it to happen overnight, and it wasn't. And that's frustrating. But I think if you're committed to the change, I mean, how long do you say people need to continue using like your behavior change tool, part of the AI, before we get to coaching, before they start seeing change? What do you have like a time frame that you tell people to kind of hold on to that?
Yeah. So we typically require people to use our tool, as in from like an access perspective, for a year.
Good.
The first month is where you see most of the progress capture, right? Because there's so much, like most people use the tool pretty aggressively in that first month, and they'll see like huge improvements, and it's which is amazing. It's amazing that people are getting this feedback from the AI, internalizing it, and then improving, right?
Yeah.
But then it's in the repeated use of the tool consistently over the next year that we see people actually maintain the higher level scores. Because what will happen frequently is people will use it, consistently over that first month. They'll make all of this progress. They'll have all these lovely like behavioral gains, and then they'll not use it for a certain period of time, and then they come back, and then their scores are immediately like a pretty real drop. Right. And so just having seen that user behavior early on in our journey, now we're able to really provide people with learning journeys that will support more consistent improvement over time.
Yeah. It sounds a lot like dieting or working out, right? I mean, you want to lose weight, you want to get in shape. So you start, and that first month you're all pumped up and you see some change, but then so many people have slide off, and it takes time. It takes time to build that. So when you're talking about, that's all the behavior change. Now let's talk about the coaching. How does your AI work on coaching a human into, improving or bettering their nonverbal skills?
The best example of how our software supports more of a coaching journey is with our in-call sidekick. So we have a tool that can join any call, alongside of you. It doesn't join the call as a bot. I don't know if you've experienced some of those note takers. Ours is really like a private coach in your corner, only for you, only seeing you, only analyzing you, but doing so in real time. And so the AI, the sidekick, accesses your web stream. So again, sees you from the perspective of your audience, and then can give you nudges in real time. So for example, if on this podcast I was like, oh yeah, waxing poetic, and then I like zoom out of frame, or I'm like way too close to the mic, or I'm touching my face, or my posture's all of a sudden become compromised, I would get these visual icon nudges saying like, hey, your posture, like fix your posture, you're touching your face, stop touching your face. And so you can actually get these coaching prompts in real time that help you course correct in real time. And the interesting thing there is that we had to spend a lot of time figuring out how we could have our nudges be obvious enough that people would see them, but not annoying and not distracting.
Yeah. Right.
And what we found is that there were certain behaviors that we could have our users correct in real time. And most of those were the nonverbals, right? It was easy to like say, like look into the lens, like remember to look into the lens with just like a little eye icon. But it was quite distracting and would throw people off to have like a sentence of text saying like, slow down your speech, you're talking too fast. So we've kind of hit a sweet spot now where the sidekick is helpful and not annoying and distracting.
So I have just like a personal question on that, because I've experienced this too. Like when I'm asking a question, I look in the camera. I've been taught that by a producer, but I find that when you're talking, I have to look at you because I want to see your facial expressions. So does your service teach that to do that, or is it always look in the camera?
So we teach, if you're talking, you want to anchor your eye gaze into the lens. You don't have we don't want you to stare into the lens and not blink and not, because that actually is pretty threatening. But so you want to anchor like around 90% of the time you're talking, you want to be looking into the lens. When you're listening, we calibrate the eye gaze so that, because we also think that it's just more natural to look at the person on your screen. But what we want to avoid when we're listening is like sometimes people have everyone on a completely different screen. And so they're like, I love this. I feel so connected to the person who's talking to me, and the person who's talking to you is like, what's going on?
I have a guy that works with us that, he used to do that. His camera, his screen was over here and his camera was there. And I'm like, I can't talk to you, man. You gotta move it. It feels like you're not even listening to me. And I know you are, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. And that brings up an interesting point with, our approach, because again, what our AI can do, because we focus specifically on the user, right? We've stayed away from analyzing other people on the call, because in the exact example you used, if we were analyzing your friend, our AI would be telling you like, hey, Chris, this guy's not paying any attention to you. And it's like, no, I know he is. It's just that his setup is such that it makes it seem like he's like looking off into the distance. So we found it's more effective for that user to use our technology and say, hey, by the way, your perceived trustworthiness is very, very low, because when Chris is talking to you, you're looking completely off screen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I like that. Plus, I think, and tell me if you agree with this or if I'm off base, but like when people start learning about nonverbal, it's very easy to start judging people.
Yes.
Right. To be like, oh, like I see her, she just did this. She's angry at me. And it's like, well, wait, no, Dr. Ekman always used to say, just because you can see the what doesn't mean you know the why. And unless you can connect those two dots, you can't assume that you know the why just because you saw something. Right. And I always thought like, so I agree with you. If your bot was telling me what you were thinking to me during this call, it could be way off base and it can ruin our conversation.
Absolutely. And that is what I wish, like, I really wish more people knew that, because I do see technologies that are like, decoding the nonverbals of your prospects.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people are like paying for this. And I'm just like, okay, clearly no one on that team knows anything about nonverbal communication science and behaviors. And like this, I just think I'm like, wow, you could really be getting some wrong signals there, right? Because most of these tools aren't even establishing a baseline for that person's normal behaviors.
Yeah.
So you're like,
exactly.
So how can you tell if that person like is leaning in?
Right.
And if
I love that point.
If they're incorrectly framed, then you can't see anything.
Yeah,
so
I love that point. When I teach my class on nonverbals, I tell people that all the time, that phrase was like burned into my soul. Just because you can see the what doesn't mean you know the why. And I tell everyone, you're going to make the mistake. You're going to go home and you're going to see anger on your spouse's face. And then you're going to be like, man, she's mad at me. Stop right there as soon as you think that and maybe say, hey, is everything okay? As opposed to assuming that you know. And I agree with you that now the software comes out and I see it all the time. Like you can know you can like read someone's mind. They're almost promising like mind reading skills when it comes to those things. And Dr. Abby and I are always like, head shake, cause it's just so terrible that people are paying a lot of money for those things and it just doesn't work.
Right. I mean, like arm crossing is another perfect example.
Oh man.
Like it doesn't.
Yeah. It could be cold, right?
Exactly. It could be cold. You could be considering, it could be like so many different things. And people, I think just understandably, right? We live in very chaotic, complex worlds. People just want simple messages, simple signals.
Yeah. One and one doesn't always equal that in a nonverbal world. So I love that. So let me ask, if people want to know more like about you or about the company, the tool, we talked a lot about it. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are very interested. Where should they go to find out more?
Our website is probably the best place to go to even interact with the tool. We have a free version of the tool available, virtualsapiens.co, so not .com. And then on LinkedIn, we have a lot of thought leadership. We have a talk show that focuses on the future of work. So that can be a great place also to just get some educational resources and, hear more about how we think about things.
Perfect. Make sure both of those links are in the show notes. Now, this podcast, I've been doing it since 2009. And in this particular series, I always ask these two questions, and I've asked them from the very beginning, because this is something that just always fascinated me. I know for me, I wouldn't be where I'm sitting here today if it wasn't for a few very key mentors in my life. I mean, people that for no rhyme and reason just took some time out of their life and spent time making me a better person. Do you have any mentors in your life that you would not be sitting here right now if it wasn't for those people?
Yes, a few actually. But the two that really come to mind, Lori Masad. She very early on actually in my transition from my dancing to founding Choreography for Business, there was a critical moment where I was like, I feel like I have something interesting to share that would be valuable to people who are like not in the ballet world. She very quickly was like, absolutely. There's room for this. There's a need for this. And she had been a big like CHRO in her career. And so she was able to really just put some critical connections in place for me.
That's awesome.
And then the other woman is Janet Macaluso, who was just another like total champion at a time where I just needed some real enthusiasm, around this unique kind of weird thing that I was trying to do.
That's great. I love it when people have stories of like somebody like that, like just kind of swooping in and helping you achieve your ideas and your goals. Cause that's just such a nice thing to have. That's why I've always asked that question. Yeah. It's good to hear that, a lot of us, it's very rare for me to meet somebody that they said, I had actually nobody help me. I had to do this all myself. It's very rare. Like I think I had that once in all the years I've been doing this. Yeah. So that's really cool.
Nice.
And then this other question we've started a list of books that are recommended by guests on our website. And it does not have to be about the things we talked about today. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. But do you have any books that you've read in your time that you're like, I want everyone to read this book?
Yes. So I am like allergic to business books. Like I just,
good.
Most of them can be summarized in like a few pointers. So, but totally on another level, like sci-fi, there's this amazing book called Snow Crash. Have you read it?
I have not.
Oh my gosh. The author, Neal Stephenson, he's a phenomenal science fiction author. And Snow Crash is really interesting and particularly relevant these days. He wrote it in the 90s and he coined the term metaverse. And so it's just one of those like trippy journeys where you're like, wow, this book was written in the 90s. And yet so much of what he wrote about is such a big part of our lives today.
Wow.
And so it's just fascinating. It's super well written, really engaging story, awesome character development, like highly recommend it.
I love it. I love it when we get a non-science business book. I love it because a lot of people recommend like something that, that they read Simon Sinek or something like that. And they're like, oh, this book really, I loved it, but I love getting the sci-fi ones.
Yeah, totally.
I have a couple sitting on my shelf here from guests that were like, oh, you have to go read this series. And I went and bought them.
Right. Totally. And, I will say, just to be totally fair, the one book from a behavioral kind of nonverbal perspective that I thought, of course, like all of Joe's books must reads, but Joe actually recommended to me, People Watching by Desmond Morris. Like years ago, he recommended that to me. And it's a brick. Do I have it over here? Oh yeah, I do. People Watching up at the top. Phenomenal. And so impactful for my work because it was very much like the root of where some of these human behaviors started, like deep in our evolution, and like talk about like the why we do certain things.
Yeah.
So that book, for anyone who's really interested in getting like to the bottom of some of how these behaviors have evolved in us, that's the one I would recommend.
I love it when someone who's like at the top of their field, like Joe, when they recommend a book, you're like, okay, if this guy is recommending that book, I'm definitely going to get it and read it, right?
Yes, totally.
I love that. I had that with Joe a couple of times too. Actually, I have a book that he gave me. He's like, you have to read this. Go read it. And he just handed it and said, go read it. So I love that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, those kind of recommendations are like, you can't even say no, right?
Yes. Oh, for sure. Yeah, totally.
Rachel, it was awesome having you here. Your product sounds amazing. Your transition of life career sounds truly phenomenal and amazing. And I never really thought about dance in the way that you brought it up ever before. So it makes a lot of sense. I can see the transition being not as big of a gap as I thought it would be after your explanation. So that's kind of cool. So thanks for sharing all that with us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. This was a total pleasure.
Thank you all for joining Rachel and I this month. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. And next month, we'll be back with influencer Melanie Avalon. Be a great conversation with her. Until then, stay safe. See you.